requirement. It is
You need to mute that.
oh, thank you. Yeah. All right, let's go and see what happens. Oh. I'm already muted on mine. Already muted on everything that I can get to. So a master plan gets adopted as part of the Michigan state law that requires master plans. It is a plan that's supposed to be coordinated and harmonious. It's, for economical purposes, right? We're considering the character of the community and sustainability, excuse me, and suitability for a variety of land uses. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. It's about the benefit of the community, right? We're trying to promote systems of transportation, safety from fire and other dangers. We focused a lot in this master plan. There's a separate section, particularly for our parks. So even though there's one overarching master plan, there's different elements to it that address all of these different things. This is a puzzle that you might find of the city of Marshall if you're hunting around downtown. Why do we have a puzzle in here? It's just an example. When you approach a puzzle, you might approach a puzzle in a variety of ways. The idea is a master plan is like a puzzle because all the pieces are there. When we're putting this together, a master plan is just defining all those pieces and parts. How does it come together? It might not all come together, from one corner across the picture, right? You might start with the perimeter, or you might start with chunks of the interior. That doesn't mean all of these things are going to be done on day one, right? It's going to take some time to implement what is in our master plan. Like I said, state law requires us to do this master plan. And we have some, pretty significant development in our community that we want to make sure that we address as part of our longstanding goals, how that's going to affect us. Housing is a pretty hot commodity right now. We want to talk about how that's addressed and the shortages and costs associated with it. And do you want this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll let you. Thanks. Oh, I'm Marcia Strange, the Director of Community Development for the City of Marshall.
Good evening. My name is Jason Ball. I've been the project manager for this project from Progressive Companies for almost a year now. So I'll just go over really quickly the process that has led us to today. So just so you know a little bit about roles and responsibilities for developing a master plan. So as a city, you all have a planning commission. Those members of the planning commission are appointed by your city council. They're ultimately responsible for approving and adopting the plan that comes out of this process. So your planning commission will review that plan, send it along to your city council. Your city council then chooses whether to accept or reject that plan. They can send it back to the planning commission and say, try again. And then your city staff has been involved in this process throughout. They're the ones that selected us as consultant along with your planning commission and city council. They oversee this process, and Marcia, Derek, Marguerite, and others throughout have really helped us be sure that as we're doing this kind of work that you all know about it, that you can show up tonight, provide your feedback, give us input. Throughout this master planning process, we've had a really outstanding steering committee that's been made up of planning commissioners, city council members, business owners, representatives from the school district, and other citizens that have met about monthly now. We've had 7 steering committee meetings since we started last April or May. And that steering committee has really guided the process throughout and been sure that as we do public engagement, as we do work, we're doing it in the right places, right? So all those steering committee members were with us at the Fridays at the Fountain when we were there, getting feedback around street options and park options. And lastly, we've been the consulting team that sort of does the behind the scenes, the added horsepower to get this work done, because all of your city staff people have day jobs. They can't just quit those and work on a master plan process every 5 years. The steering committee early on identified what we called project principles, and these are basically non-negotiables, things that the steering committee said, we have to be sure that as we walk through this process, we're keeping these things top of mind, and if we don't do these things, we haven't done a good job. So the first one is that any of the plans that we do have to create safer connections. So providing good connections between places in Marshall and for people of all ages and abilities. One of the things we've heard from people throughout is that folks in Marshall like that they can walk a lot of places, but we want to be sure that that's safer and it's easier to do for everybody. And we're also connecting to our parks and other key destinations so folks can get where they want to go. Being sure that we communicate, we're transparent about the process, and we try to include everybody. Early on in this work, how many of you completed the first survey that was online? Good, like more than half. That's a win. Early on as we were doing that survey, we had a question about what folks' age was that was completing the survey, and we had nobody under the age of 18. And so we worked with our steering committee. We found some great 7th grade teachers that helped bring that survey and get their classrooms involved. So we got 100 and some odd responses from 7th graders because we knew that we weren't hitting that mark on being sure that we were being inclusive. The next is balancing history and growth. Marshall's obviously a really historic community with a big growth thing happening with the major campus site. And so growth is great. We want to be sure that we're balancing the history of Marshall and being sure that we sort of stay true to the roots and what makes the place great. Being sure we're planning for future generations. We'll talk more about this, but being sure we're thinking about not just who's here today, but who's going to be here tomorrow, and giving options for those people to be here in Marshall so they don't have to leave when they graduate high school. And then lastly, really emphasizing Marshall's points of pride. As a community, Marshall has some really great assets and things that we wanted to be able to leverage. We have some things that are a little bit hidden gems, and we wanted to make those things a little less hidden. Overall in this process, there's actually been 4 plans that we've been working on with the steering committee and all those folks throughout. So the first was updating the city's community engagement plan that was originally done back in 2015. So that happened back in the spring. Next, we finished a 5-year Parks and Recreation plan that got submitted to the Michigan DNR in January. You're here for the master plan process now. We're getting sort of final feedback on some of the key pieces of that before we send it out. And then lastly, there's an economic development and marketing plan that's going to implement some of those key goals of the master plan. As we look forward, just in terms of schedule, so you all know what's coming, we have the open house here tonight. As part of that open house, anything you do tonight and give feedback on, you'll also be able to do online after. So once this is done, the city will send out communications encouraging folks to complete it online. That'll stay open for the month of February. So anybody that can't be here tonight has a good opportunity to give their feedback. We'll then be drafting the actual plan document in March with the intent that that gets presented to the Planning Commission in April for their consideration. There's then, if the Planning Commission passes it on to City Council and City Council approves it, there's a required 63-day review window from the state where you as citizens, also local adjoining communities, other folks get a chance to comment on that plan, piece through it, review it, give your comments to the city. It then comes back to the Planning Commission and City Council for final approval. We'll then finalize the economic development and marketing plan along with the master plan, but we want to be sure that economic development and marketing plan is consistent with the goals that get finalized in the city's master plan. Any questions about process and kind of how we got here so far tonight from anybody? Yes, sir. So the steering committee was originally, members were identified and approved by the Planning Commission and City Council when we got started. If you're interested in being more involved, Derek or Marcia or anybody at City Hall can engage you, and there are lots of opportunities to volunteer with different city things. I can't answer that question, but Derek or Marcia probably for sure can. Thank you. With that, I'll turn. Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to dig into the details for the survey results, we had those at the last open house. We can certainly get those to you. It is a lot to piece through. It's thick, but that's available. We can put it on the city's website. If you're interested, we can get it to you as well. We had a summary of some of the key results when we did the open houses back in October. But the full detailed results we haven't put out there. We certainly can do that if you're interested, and that'll be part of the full plan as a summary of those survey results. Yes.
Things to be meaningfully heard, but with our past experience with the city council, we come and give our input and goes in one ear out the other. Now, is all this providing input just as a psychological palliative to present the illusion that we are actually having meaningful participation in what's going on? Or are you actually gonna hear what we have to say?
Well, God, I hope not. So yeah, the intent here is to really hear what you say, right? So at our last open house, we asked everybody what their preferences were for housing types. And so that's dictated how we've developed options for future land use maps and thinking through what that, and that's also driven some of the goals and objectives that are downstairs for you to review. So the intent here, right, is that we're asking you a bunch of questions tonight. You'll then see those come out in the draft plan. And if that's not reflected in that plan, if you feel like the feedback you've given and the feedback that's in the survey has been misheard or hasn't been understood directly, then you have the opportunity to provide that comment again when the plan goes out for review.
Well, that's why it's important to see the survey results just for that reason.
Sure. And I think we're really proud of what we got in terms of survey results, and Amanda will talk about that more, but regardless, like Marshall's a town of 6,000 people, and we had 600 people respond to that survey, which is great, but it's 600 survey results, right? And so we're always balancing results of feedback from things like that with feedback from your elected appointed officials, activities like this. And so it's not just survey, it's not just open house, it's a blend of all that feedback together that's kind of driving the goals. All right, Amanda, do you want to talk about what we've heard?
Good evening. It's great to see a full house. My name is Amanda Lankard. I am a citizen member of the steering committee, but I also wear several other hats. I am the Marshall Public Schools School Board President. I am also on the LDFA and DDA, and I am a Marshall Township resident. So lots of hats. So I'm going to go over what we've heard, which Regis is a summary. It's definitely probably not the detail, but at least it gives you a flavor for what we've heard throughout this process. So all of you that took the survey, you likely know what was in the survey, but it asked questions about housing, about economic development, parks and rec, natural resources, challenges, opportunities, transportation, all of the things that make up our city. We received 689 responses. I think that was open for 4 months for residents. 65% of the respondents were residents of the city of Marshall. 27% were Marshall area residents, but not living in the city of Marshall. And 22% of the respondents were property owners. About 17% of the respondents were kiddos under the age of 18, which is kind of nice because these are the people that are going to be here when we're gone. We held 3 or 4 pop-up events. So if you went to the farmer's market in July or August, or if you were at Fridays at the Fountain, there were several of us there trying to engage with the community. We gave you some money and you were able to vote in the various buckets for what you wanted. A lot of it was, I think Fridays at the Fountain and some of the farmers market were about East Michigan Avenue and West Michigan Avenue, voting for gateway corridors and walkability. What did you want as a community? We held an open house in October, and that was, we had a late afternoon at the library and an evening at Dark Horse. We asked a lot about housing. What kind of housing do our residents want? Do they want single family homes? Do they want townhouses? Do they want small apartment complexes? Because all of that makes up how people live in our community. So today is our open house number 2, which all of you are here. Thank you. And then we're also going to be sending out, as Jason said, another community survey, another opportunity to give feedback. And so far, we have received over 1,000 points of feedback for the plan. So we used that information to form some of those goals that you may have seen downstairs. So what did people like about Marshall? They liked walkability. 63% said walkability was one of their top things that they liked about Marshall. Number 2 was safety, low crime. So about 63% ranked that as one of their top. Number 3 was local restaurants and businesses. About 60% ranked that one as their top. Historic character was about 59.4%, and family friendly was 53.5%. Now, I thought this was really interesting because we did break out some of the youth responses, and they weren't exactly the same. So for our youth under 18, their top 5 responses, number 1 was local businesses and restaurants, 66%. Number 2 was walkability. Number 3 was family friendly. Number 4 was safety and low crime. And number 5 was quality schools, which made my little heart smile. Sadly, they did not prioritize historic character, but I don't necessarily think that our youth appreciates all that Marshall provides. So obviously housing is expensive. We have had a housing shortage not only in the city of Marshall, but across the county, across the nation. It's not anything new, but as we have more and more people move into this area, have jobs in this area, we want them to live here because we want them to contribute to our community. And go to our schools and dine at our restaurants and purchase at our downtown retailers. But the cost to buy and rent is expensive. And we need to figure out a way to fix that, or at least find, I guess, for the future land use plan, where we might be building. And one of the top themes in the survey was maintenance and preservation. So maintenance of what we already have, preservation of what we already have. When you look at Parks and Rec, making sure that our parks are clean, that our play structures are taken care of, that our fountain is taken care of, that we're good stewards of all of the resources that we have in our community. So as far as the pop-up results, people want a safer downtown area on West Michigan Avenue. And I know we've had an open house a few weeks ago regarding the MDOT traffic calming from the Marshall Police Department perspective, if I can talk on behalf of somebody I know. Speeding downtown is a huge issue, right? Speeding anywhere, traffic anywhere. So I think anything that we can do in our community to try to solve some of those issues is a good thing. They want more flexible space in the downtown area or overall in commercial spaces. So maybe that's a combination of retail, residential, redeveloping some of our downtown business fronts, you know, top story, second, third story residential, with bottom being retail spaces. And then we heard that people want more trails. They want more bike paths. They want to enhance the river walk. We want to make sure that the river walk is in top shape. And then there was some interest in a dog park, which I think we've heard a lot. And then improve equipment at parks. I think, you know, swings, making sure all of the things are functioning and working. So at our open house number 1, we asked a lot about housing. In my day job, I'm the CEO of the Battle Creek Area Association of Realtors. So housing is a big deal in my paid position. So by and large, we have a lot of single family houses in Marshall. And what we heard from people that attended the pop-ups is we want more single family houses. Unfortunately, building a single family house is not cheap. The cost per square is pretty expensive. So we got to figure out a way to subsidize or create density that'll decrease some of those expenses. Again, taking advantage of the second and third floor apartments in the downtown, making sure that those buildings are built out so we can have people living in our downtown. More choices, townhomes. We have a few townhomes, a few mixed-use buildings, small apartment buildings was a theme. And then an interesting thing that came up was exploring options for the Brooks Industrial Park to possibly become residential. Right now it's zoned light industrial, but you probably can't see that from where you're at, but there were little dots indicating where people wanted development. So green dots were public parks, yellow dots were traditional neighborhoods. So yeah. That's what we heard so far from the survey. And now Jason's gonna come up and talk about all of the demographics.
Really quickly. So like we said, there are lots of different inputs into coming up with our goals. And one of those is just the numbers. So what have things changed in terms of hard numbers and demographics over time? So this slide shows is between 2010 and 2022. All the sort of cities in Calhoun County either lost population or stayed basically the same. But you'll see when you look at those, other than Albion, the change in households is either we lost less households or we gained more households than we gained in population. And that's because generally we live with fewer people now than we did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We're living longer, we're choosing to get married later or have kids later. And as a result, we have households that are much smaller. Instead of 3, 4, 5 people in a house, we have 2 or 3. And that drives population change in Marshall. So if we sort of zoom out over the last 20 years and look at change in population across different age groups, so people under 5, people 5 to 19, 20 to 34, 35 to 54, 55 to 69, and then 70 and older, what you see there is, in Marshall and throughout sort of Calhoun County and Michigan as a whole, the baby boomers essentially moved to the right in that chart, right? So you're a group of folks between 55 and 69 have continued to age, and then we've lost population in a lot of those other categories. Marshall, the blue line in the middle of that, has lost significantly more. And it's not like you have a bunch of vacant houses in Marshall, right? So as we're talking about housing, we're talking about this issue, what we see there is you have folks that are in the same house they've been in for a while. They probably used to have kids, or there are other people that were in that house. Those kids are no longer in that house anymore. And there wasn't a place for those kids in Marshall if they wanted to stay. And so they went somewhere else. Or as people age and they want to get out of a house that maybe has stairs, or they want to downsize, there may not be those options in Marshall. And so they go somewhere else. There are lots of cities that might have a similar demographic or a similar population change like that, where you have lots of vacancy, you have lots of empty houses, you have lots of things up for rent or for sale that don't go. That's not your town, right? So this sort of drives home that point about thinking about options for more housing, because it's not that people don't want to be here. It's just that there aren't very many options, because if you're in a house you're in 20 years ago, chances are you're not going to change right now for a bunch of different reasons. And so this kind of results in this chart, which is household size. So how many people live in a place versus how many bedrooms it has. So the blue graphic here, or the blue lines, are how big a household is. So the first one on the left there is how many one-person households we have compared to how many one-bedroom places we have to live. And then 2-person households versus 2-bedroom places, and then 3-person households versus 3-bedroom places. And there you see this big mismatch, right? So Marshall has a lot of 3-bedroom households, or 3-bedroom houses, not a lot of 3- and 4-person households. Marshall has a lot of 1- and 2-people households, but not a lot of 1- and 2-bedroom housing options. And so this last one then shows income. So income in Marshall has outpaced Calhoun County and the state as a whole. Your median income is now higher. That's also a result of that change in age demographic. Your most people are in their highest earning years, right? The years leading up to retirement. And so your median income is going up as you have more of those folks in your town. One of the things we've heard a lot is about traffic, particularly on Michigan Avenue and in downtown. And we wanted to point out that well, we've seen declines in population, pretty good income, traffic volumes over that same 20 years have come down pretty significantly. So back in 2002, 2003, there were about 14,000 cars that drove through downtown every day. The most recent data we have is about 11,000. So that's a decrease of 3,000 cars over time. So as we're thinking about maybe options to slow traffic or do some things to get trucks out of downtown, that kind of reflects that reality that we just have fewer cars going through downtown. We maybe don't need all those lanes like we did in the past. Some key takeaways, kind of boxing all of that up together, like we said, and allowing that to drive our goals, right? I will say that for us, Julie, James, and I that get to do this in lots of different places, you have an incredibly civically engaged community. If you tell somebody else this, we'll deny it, but working with your steering committee and your folks here has been a blast. It's not always that way for us. And we think you have more like civic organizations per capita than any town we've gotten to work in, right? So Amanda wears like 9 different hats, but I think almost everybody in this town wears at least 4 different hats and things that they're on, and that's great. We talked a lot about Marshall's a place where everybody wants to walk, and because everybody walks, people care about safety more than you might be in town where everybody drives. So we want to be sure that that's a priority. Like we said, Marshall as a whole has been aging, and so we need to have more options for houses. We have a couple of realtors on our committee who said, if there is a house in Marshall with 2 bedrooms that has 1 floor, it is gone before we can put it on the market. And so providing more options for those kinds of things. And then lastly, trying to make some of the gems of Marshall a little less hidden. Your river walks and your natural assets are great, but a lot of people come to Marshall as a tourist downtown and have no idea those things are there. And so trying to find ways to sort of point those out and highlight those things. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew to give kind of an overview of the master plan.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Skibby. I'm a business owner in town. I own Pastrami Joe's. I've now been on city council for, I think, 48 hours. So my involvement here with the steering committee was particularly as a business owner, specifically one working in downtown and giving input from that perspective. So we came up as a steering committee with a vision for this plan. And it's the city of Marshall will be a thriving, connected community that invests in balanced growth to honor and protect its history, natural environment, and quality of life. And then we have come up with 4 goals. And if you see these, a lot of what's going to be in these goals is reflected in those project principles we started with. And then those top 5 takeaways from the survey results are all going to be reflected in these goals here. So number 1 is to maintain and celebrate Marshall's historic character. Huge. Marshall is a historic town and is one of the best things that makes Marshall what it is. And so we want to protect and enhance the historic integrity of Marshall. We had one of the historians on our committee to kind of help look through some of this as well. But this looks like zoning or putting ways to make sure that the historic parts of Marshall stay the historic parts of Marshall without hampering other development in other parts of town. But we want to preserve what's beautiful in especially these historic parts. And then to celebrate that in our parks, our public spaces, events, like the fountain, and doing events at the fountain in downtown, having celebrations near those historic things is a big part of what we want to do. Goal number 2 is Marshall will continue to be a vibrant community. So we know Marshall has been a vibrant community. Marshall is a vibrant community, and it will continue to be a vibrant community. Downtown district is one of the biggest parts of that. So we want to safeguard the vitality there. And part of that has to do with the road running through Marshall or through Michigan Avenue. So we want to make sure people are comfortable walking, going to the shops, getting in and out of their cars, having a bite to eat, having a drink in the social district, and creating that vibrancy downtown. We also want to establish the river district. And this is something we have identified from the fountain on South Kalamazoo heading towards the Riverwalk. So that area is, I think, prime for development and investment. So that would be a place that people can, either develop more businesses, retail, restaurants, and even housing, and do mixed use there. And you'll see some of that in the future land map that we have downstairs. But that's a great spot to be able to connect our downtown with our river. Because we are a city that celebrates our downtown, it's vibrant, but we also have a beautiful river that I think gets overlooked a lot in terms of, what's great about Marshall. So finding a way to connect probably your 2 greatest assets through that river district is going to be huge. Making gateway corridors safer. And gateway corridors are those major veins into town, particularly I-69 to the fountain, making sure that stays safe. People want to drive from the grocery store straight across 5 lanes of traffic to Domino's without stopping. It can be a little hairy down there. So we just want to make those safer and then also beautify them. Raising awareness of arts and culture. If you don't know how much art and culture we have in this town, you just got to look. We have so many theaters, music, arts in public. It's fantastic. We want to continue that. And then support continued success of Marshall Public School District. You can't say you love Marshall today without saying you want to be able to invest in Marshall tomorrow. Marshall tomorrow is in our schools currently, and we have to invest in them as well. And then maintain public safety and quality of life, which you heard safety is a big priority for us and everybody in Marshall. All right, goal number 3, kind of a double meaning here. Marshall community and growth will be sustainable. So we want to sustain our future by expanding our housing supply to create new housing. We want to create guidelines and guardrails along that so that that housing growth is sustainable. But we also protect and invest in the rivers, parks, open spaces. And the Parks and Recreation Plan that was just put out has a lot more details and how to do that specifically. In addition, the climate resilience, flood prevention, and the health of local natural resources. And then continue to develop Marshall area as a regional hub for employment. So we know that the major campus is going to be one place, what to do with the Brooks Industrial Park and other land to make sure it's not just, all of our eggs in one basket, but we want to be a diverse place that employs a lot of people in a variety of industries. And then goal number 4 is Marshall will be an even better connected community. As you saw in a lot of our goals, transportation and walkability is huge. So we want people to be able to walk. That includes sidewalks. We want your feedback today on where some of those sidewalks should be and what the priority to put them in is. And we want that feedback downstairs tonight. Enhance public communications to ensure you guys are all aware and everybody's aware of, things that are changing in the city as well as events and opportunities here. And then to maintain Marshall's identity as a civically engaged community, which, as Jason just mentioned, we have a town that has a lot of pride, and because of that, people are involved, and that makes Marshall amazing. Do you want me to go through this or you?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
So lastly, you'll notice downstairs, this future land use map is downstairs as well for you to give feedback on. There's a couple of changes on this that we wanted to point out for you as you go down and look at it compared to the last time or the last plan that the city did. Your last future land use map had 19 categories. This one has 7. So we've really tried to simplify things a little bit and make it easier to understand and also a little more common sense. We mentioned expanded areas for residential, so we'd love to have your feedback on thinking about doing residential in Brooks Industrial Park. Do you all think that's a good idea? Do you not think that's a good idea? Those are the kinds of things we're looking for your feedback on. We've expanded the area that we're calling traditional neighborhood, your historic area within downtown, a little bit out compared to where it was, just so it stops at streets and we have some clear places that make sense to have that neighborhood be focused. And then the areas in orange on that map are areas we're calling neighborhood mixed use. So those are places that are currently vacant or have opportunities for redevelopment into areas that provide a little bit of housing and maybe small sort of commercial options for folks throughout Marshall. So those include like the old Michigan State Farm site, the River District site down by Dark Horse, Michigan Avenue just to the west of the traffic circle. And so those are those places we're looking at redevelopment opportunities and more flexibility. So downstairs, if you haven't finished going through the open house next, please do that. You have opportunities to help us prioritize transportation improvements, give us feedback on that vision statement. Did we get it right? Did we miss something? Rate those master plan objectives. Tell us, I love this one, or man, I really hate that one. I wish you'd take it out. We want to hear those things. And then give us feedback on the future land use map and eat our pizza so I don't have to take it all home to my kids. The map, and then when you give feedback, I think most of you have done it already. You have an option to do it on paper, or you can scan that QR code and do it on your phone, but I think it's probably just a ton easier to do on paper. So with that, I think we're all happy to answer any questions you all have downstairs. We don't have to keep you up here in this room any longer, and we'll see you downstairs to finish giving feedback in the open house. Thank you very much.